The Executive General Manager of Footy at the AFL is Laura Kane. Laura, welcome to the box. It's great to have you on Crunch Time.
Thank you for having me.
We've all got our special projects today as to what we feel most passionately about. I want to start with the Christian Petracca scenario. What processes were specifically examined and cleared in the handling of that incident on Monday?
The whole thing, from when he came off the field to understanding what the conversation was, but we backed in the processes quite early. Although it's a really poor outcome for him, and I hope he's okay. I hope he recovers quickly. I know he would. It would be a real shame for him to miss the back half of the season. It was relatively stock standard in terms of symptoms changing, a player having a contact injury, trying to push through and then not being able to.
So 21 and a half minutes on the field. Andrew Dillon used the phrase yesterday, as soon as the doctors saw he wasn't travelling well. Should he have been removed from the field as soon as it was clear that he wasn't travelling well?
I think you can examine. I mean, I've sat on a bench for 7 or 8 years. I was on the bench during that game, during that quarter, and watched it up close. But I think you can pick apart minutes and seconds and processes. I think ultimately the player comes to the doctor, has a conversation, there's a clinical assessment and says, I'm no good. I'm in pain. Pain relief, if that was given, hasn't worked. This applies to all contact injuries, and at some point the symptoms changed and he had to go off to hospital.
So is it at all troubling that Collingwood players in real time out on the field realised that he was no good and spoke to him specifically about it while there was no intervention?
Oh, we don't want players to be that sore on field, noticeable by their own teammates or, in fact, others. But I'm sure it's not the first time, and I don't think it will be the last. Players try to push through, and you see players try and battle through different injuries and pain, and they are trying to do the best for their teammates and their fans, but clearly it's not something that we want to see.
So with the perfection of hindsight, was it troubling that he was on the ground with a grade 5 rupture of the spleen?
Knowing the outcome, it's troubling, but I think that could apply to anything. It's just that it's an internal injury that we clearly don't want players to suffer. We clearly don't want him to miss the back half of the season. And yes, troubling that he has an internal injury to that degree, but not troubling that we don't know it at the time. We can't see it at the time. And the clinical assessment that was conducted both when he came off the first time and throughout the quarter was normal process on a footy field.
So it was not foreseeable that, given the excruciating pain that he was in, and that opposition players could see that was abnormal out on the field, it wasn't foreseeable that this was an escalating scenario.
That's what the doctors are looking for. So their emergency management training is when do the symptoms imagine a patient. Imagine you go to the doctor and you articulate to your doctor what's wrong. If you go back the next day and said it gets worse, if you go back half an hour later and said it's worse, it's more painful, I can't push through. Once those symptoms change, there are triggers. You can imagine a list of things the doctors are waiting to hear. And when they start to hear some particular symptoms, it might indicate that something's more wrong and that something needs more attention or different attention.
Didn't they miss those signals along the way?
The process was okay. The clinical assessment by the doctors was standard. Christian's an extremely experienced player. He's extremely in touch with his own body, his performance, as are most of our players. So we're comfortable, and as are Melbourne.
The Brisbane Lions told us last night that they'd reassessed their processes in light of what happened. They wouldn't say that they were critical of Melbourne, but they've used the moment to go to make sure between the medical staff and the coaching staff that scenario wouldn't play out for them. Would you hope? I feel like that should be led by the AFL, but would you hope that clubs would think through that themselves?
Clubs are always trying to get better. I remember when I was in a footy program, you'd watch and you'd follow things that would happen over a weekend. You'd follow processes, good and bad, and you would learn from them and you would talk about them and you would say, how can we learn from this? Is there something that we would do differently, understand differently? Do we have a process that could be improved as a result of what we've seen? But we've got some of the best doctors in the world. We've got some of the best sports physicians in the world that are top of their field, making unbelievable decisions, and lots of them, by the way, during a game of footy.
Will you make a topic of conversation from the AFL to the clubs about those processes? But clearly they're not uniform. Everyone has their own quirks and nuance. Will you make that a point of discussion?
From a clinical assessment perspective, no, because we're comfortable with the doctors and the training that they get. They go through emergency management training, and that's the escalation, Gerard, that you talk of when symptoms start somewhere and head a different direction. What do you do? We have emergency physicians at every single game, and they're there to assist if something is that little bit more serious, and in this case, that person got involved. But
when did they get involved?
They sit just behind the bench.
So when did they get involved last week?
Throughout.
Right throughout?
At the back end, yep.
So
the quarter comes off the first time clinically assessed by his own club doctor, and once the symptoms escalate, then the emergency physician's involved throughout that period.
Just from a spectator fan point of view, for him to be on for 21 and a half minutes, given that emergency procedure's already in place, that doctor is in place, just seems like an extraordinary amount of time to be on the field. Even in pure health, we very rarely see players out for that period of time on field. Is there any alarms there?
Player health and safety is our number one priority. And if we're not comfortable with the process, we get involved. We review so many things, and you guys would have seen over the last 18 months, we've sanctioned clubs for processes that aren't appropriate, aren't compliant with guidelines, aren't compliant with rules, including financial sanctions. So I think very clearly, if we're not comfortable, or we thought there was something wrong or something missing or something that was creating a level of unsafety for a player, we would involve ourselves. So I hope, you guys and people listening have faith that we go through really rigorous processes for review, and if we don't like something...
Without cutting off, it is hard to have faith if you're saying that emergency level doctors involved, yet the players on the field for 21 minutes of football without being assessed. They don't marry up to me.
The doctor's job is to prioritise health and safety. We see it every single weekend. The doctors are caring for the players. They are treating different niggles, different contact injuries. They are never going to put a player out there if they think it is unsafe to do so. As soon as the symptoms change, as soon as the commentary from the player change, for instance, around pain or something's different or something feels different, they use the emergency physicians to help them. And when those symptoms changed and they tipped over into symptoms that suggest we think we need to send this person to hospital, they did that.
Are you in receipt of the words Christian used to the medical, the practitioners there? What did he say?
I won't go into the details. Everything that happened with Christian when he's being assessed, outside of me saying that he was being assessed, is between him and his doctors. So I don't think that's appropriate. But I am comfortable from all the conversations that I've had with the club, the conversations our chief medical officer has had with their doctor and the emergency physician, that it's okay. But I did hear his comments around I tried to push through.
Yeah, so it's fair to say that he wanted to
play for his team.
Yeah.
And
fight back from the doctors, or the doctor said, okay, probably getting into that area again.
he got sent to hospital.
Yeah.
So I think that's the...
But the initial, was there a fight back from the doctor saying, no, I don't think that's a good idea, or suck it and see?
I think, again, without going into conversations that he's having with his doctor, know that if our club doctors were not comfortable with what was presented to them, the player wouldn't go back on the field.
Yeah.
Laura, Thursday Night Football, bit of a passion project of ours here on Crunch Time, I'll admit. Now, Andrew Dillon this week would only commit to, I think he said, a minimum 15 next year. Now, can we just clear this up once and for all? It can't be weather-related, surely. Winter happens every year. So what is the reason why Thursday Night Football is not played, if not every week, then the vast majority of the season?
Oh, people love it, don't they? I get a lot of good feedback. It makes the weekend really feel long and exciting. I might leave that to Dills to negotiate how we move forward, but I love it.
So you'd have it every week?
I love it.
Yeah.
You still wouldn't say it, though.
You're at the 1.84 million of us.
Yeah. Well, you're the majority. You are absolutely the majority.
I think there's more than 1.8 million people, 1.4 million people love it.
One thing you do, and you did 3 times last weekend, was clarify decisions, whether they be correct in your eyes or incorrect. Now, I think a lot of us love the transparency, except for a couple. Now, Ross Lyon said you've gone too far. Have you gone too far?
Yeah, I talked to Ross a little bit. I probably wouldn't like if a free kick went my way in game and then got flipped the next day. But we had 3 in a row, back to back to back. So that meant we had 3 really exciting games, because I'm often only ever asked about umpiring decisions if the score's tight and it's at the end of the game, which means we had 3 good games of footy.
Yeah. The buy structure as well. Again, we went on a little bit of a rant last week in here. Some teams, well, it happened 3 times last week, teams who have had 2 buys before a team has even had 1. Putting that all to one side, though, is this something that's being raised with you quite regularly from Clubland at the moment as something that they want you to look at?
I mean, it is. It's being raised. I had a look last week. We had a top 8. Before going into this round, we had a top 8. 4 played opening round, 4 didn't. You can sort of look at it and find whichever way you would like. Yeah. You can find data points that support whichever argument you're trying to get to. We're having a deeper look at what happens post-buy, what happens post with days break travel, no travel, etc. And we'll use all of that to make a decision ahead of next year.
As a principle, will you try to avoid teams having a second buy before other teams have had their first buy?
I'm not sure. I've heard some good ideas about how you could do it, how you could structure it. We listen to those. We speak to clubs about what could that look like, what does it look like for opening round teams, non-opening round teams, what happens with travel. The fixture is it's like a beautiful mind. It's unbelievably complicated, but it's important to work in those sort of parameters that then work from a high-performance perspective.
So obviously opening rounds necessitated it, but as we sit here now on, the 15th day of June, would you guarantee that opening round will take place in some way, shape or form next season?
We're reviewing it right now, so we'll start to form bones of the fixture at the back end of this current season. And you're starting to look at venue availability and sort of the operational bones, and that's when you make a decision on what that looks like. But no, not right now. I won't. We're reviewing it, and we'll definitely make sure everyone's clear if and when we decide to hit go again.
Can I ask you one about it irking me for a while, and I need your feeling on it? Is the pathway to league football? The Coach Talent League came into being in 1992. It's had one modification in 30 plus years, and that was a budgetary cut. There is a feeling that amongst some recruiters that private schools do the vetting for them, and the private school system will overtake at some stage the Coach League as a pathway. Because of the way they are able to put money into it. As I said, there's a budgetary cut. That's the only change that Coach Talent League has had over the journey. Could you guarantee that it will be the number one pathway going into the future in 10 years' time, or will private school take over?
Yeah, the biggest change the Coach Talent League pathway's had is that it includes girls now. So we've extended it out to both girls and boys competitions that are run in exactly the same way. It's a very large cohort, a large operation, sits in the football department. That is one of the streams of our competitive balance reviews, the talent pathway, holistically, and that's not just Coates here in Victoria with the overlay of Tasmania, Northern Territory. It's every aspect of talent. It's WA, it's South Australia, it's National Academy. It's what does all of that look like and how does that all piece together? Contemplated in that is school footy, is other kids who are trying to balance a whole heap of different things. Local club footy, people love playing local club footy. And so we're looking at all of that right now to say, what does this need to look like? How does this interconnect with our state leagues, of which we have 3 main state leagues? How does that work moving into the elite game? And what skills do these players need? But also what experience do they need? What does that couple of years need to look like once they say leave as a 15-year-old the community football pathway and start to enter into this talent phase?
And that's where the difficulty is, that once they leave that phase, they're a 15-year-old, they've finished their under-16s. If they don't get into the Coach Talent League, or if they don't get taken on a school scholarship, it seems like those players are neglected even more. Now, if the Coach Talent League doesn't exist in the way it does now, once again, if they're not in a private school, it's going to be hard for them.
Yeah, I mean, it depends which way you look at it. If you have a look at the draft last year, just the boys' draft, for instance, we had 9 of the top 10 were part of the National Academy. So what that tells you is there's something that's happening that's overlaid to, I think they're
always getting drafted though.
Yeah, that's fair. But the important part of that is, first round, I think we had 4 or 5 Bushies boys. They had all different experiences. They participated in VFL. They participated in, community footy. And to your question, we are trying to unpick what is the best pathway. What support system do you need in place?
So it sounds like you haven't really got the best handle on it yet.
Oh no, we've got a good handle on it. It's just which way we would like to move forward, and what does that look like in the context of the state league.
Quick, Kingy.
When will we have an answer on the father-son academy discussion, impact on the draft, alterations?
Yeah, that's another pillar of the competitive balance review. We're looking at probably, I think from a couple of months from now, you'll have a good understanding of father-sons, next generation academy, northern academies, player movement wise, and then the state league and the spoken about it a lot, national reserves conversation is something that we're working through, but we will make sure we get through the player movement outcomes, including father-son, in the next couple of months.
So if that's not coming for a couple of months, you wouldn't think it'd impact this year's draft?
It might.
It still might?
Yep.
That's late.
The clubs have been on notice. We've been talking about this for 12 months.
Clubs are aware?
Yeah, yep.
So the point system could change for this year's draft?
It could.
Could there still be a mid-season trade period next year?
We didn't get that much support for that, to be honest. The clubs, I think there was interest in trading of picks, but not as much interest in trading of players, is probably a fair summary of where the clubs were with that, which seems to be the sentiment at the moment, particularly if other things like DVI or like the access to academy or father-sons was to change or become fairer in the club's eyes, there was less appetite for something like a mid-season trading of players.
Laura, good to have you with us. Thanks a lot.
Beautiful.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Laura.
Laura Kane is the Executive General Manager of Footy at the AFL.